Corin Johnson is a Louisville Cardinal. And on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to explain why he could be a star in the making in the ACC next season. That said, stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. As always, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Koren Johnson, transfer from Washington, is a Louisville Cardinal, committed to Pat Kelsey's program on Monday afternoon. We're going to explain how he can be a star in the making in the ACC this upcoming season. Unfortunately for Louisville, since the portal has opened for football, it's been a matter of multiple players entering the portal. 3 more entered recently. We will discuss the depth that the Cardinals lost across the board. And then to conclude the show, we will dive into a Monday mailbag segment of the show. I know people were getting antsy. I mean, I was. And I mentioned on yesterday's show that if Louisville didn't have a commitment by late Monday evening, then I would start to get concerned. I mean, you had a weekend last weekend where Dante Maddox, Nicholas Boyd, both were on campus, both committed elsewhere. This weekend, Trey Townsend and Omar Ballo don't end up showing up. Jaden Quaintance makes his visit. Things aren't trending in the right direction for him. Ben Humrickhouse, which from Evansville, it seems like things are trending in the right direction there, but at the time we didn't know. So all eyes were on Koren Johnson and Abubakar Traore. I believed that Louisville sat in a very good position for both, and when asked, who do I think is the next men's basketball commitment, I replied with Koren Johnson from Washington. Probably a fairly popular answer for that hypothetical, and seemingly for good reason. Now, Johnson is the most recent commitment for Pat Kelsey. At this time, Louisville can now, by the numbers, form a starting 5. They have 6 players under scholarship, 7 scholarships to go. Koren Johnson is the first player on the team, in my opinion, that I believe can fill the point guard role. This past season for Washington averaged 11.1 points per game, 2.7 assists per game, 2.2 rebounds per contest, while shooting 44, 37, and 72 from the field overall. Johnson's season was good enough to grant him the 6th Man of the Year award in the Pac-12, and he did have some health issues. I believe it was a dislocated shoulder at some point in the season, but only missed minimal action, I think like a game and a half. Ended up playing really, really well down the stretch. I mean, you look at some of the games that he had this past year, it's arguable that he was better in the last month of the season. He had a 30-point game against Stanford. He had 16 against California, 17 against Arizona State, 17 against Arizona. His only game that he scored in double figures since that 30-point game against Stanford, he had 7 against UCLA in a blowout victory. But 21 and 5 against USC. In the regular season finale, he had 23 and 4 against a very good Washington State team, and then 17, 4, and 2 steals in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament against USC. Johnson was an obvious spark plug off the bench for the Huskies. As it relates to what his role would be here at Louisville, I'm sort of torn. for one, aspect of this is that he's really, really good. I mean, he just scored in double digits in a Power 5 conference in the Pac-12, playing against very good competition at times and showing out against that competition. So you would expect that he is going to get a ton of playing time, even if he doesn't start, which I do believe he's going to. One of the reasons why people think he might not is because Louisville sits in a very good spot for Wisconsin point guard Chucky Hepburn. Now, that begs the question, does Louisville play a smaller lineup with Hepburn and Johnson both starting and then start Terrence Edwards and maybe like Ben Hummerkaus and move Javon Hadley to the bench? Or are you playing Hadley as the 3, Edwards as the 2, and then Hepburn at the 1 to where Johnson is that 6 man off the bench? I think ultimately I probably would be in the camp that believes both Johnson and Hepburn would both start. Johnson can play solid on or off the ball. Fantastic shooter. And that's where a lot of his offense comes from. 6'2" player from Seattle will have 2 years of eligibility remaining. I feel like I have to keep mentioning this because there are new visitors that tune in. Shout out to everyone tuning in, whether it is a recurring visit or this is your first time listening or watching the show. I definitely appreciate it. Coren Johnson from an area up in Seattle that prioritizes offensive creation, prioritizes solid dribbling and ball handling, and just overall the ability to create your offense off the dribble. A lot of players from Seattle can shoot the rock, and Corin Johnson pretty much epitomizes what it means to be a player from Seattle. Very, very good with the ball in his hands, has an over 10%, I think it's over 20% assist rate. So the numbers don't really line up with how good of a passer he is. 2.7 assists. That's why I believe that he can be a on-ball lead guard for Louisville. But in Pat Kelsey's system, there's going to be a lot of distributing the rock, where you won't see a guard handle the ball about 80% of the times like we've been used to seeing over the past couple of seasons at Louisville. There's a lot of emphasis on shooting. Koren Johnson, 37% on 3.5 attempts. Very, very solid. 44% from the field overall. He has to improve that free throw percentage, which is sitting at about 72%. But Johnson has an advanced offensive arsenal. The skill set and the scoring repertoire are off the charts. Can get to his spot anywhere in the half court. He's not extremely explosive or athletic, but like Tyler Johnson, that first step is absolutely incredible. It is tough to guard. He is tough to stay in front of. It allows him to get downhill, but also the ability to change direction and stop on a dime and be able to hang in the air and create his shot. The jump shot is solid. The release point with his mechanics, coupled with that speed and with that creation and separation ability, it's hard for other players to guard him, especially longer guards that might not necessarily be as quick. Johnson is crafty with the ball in his hands, and I'm really intrigued to see the role that Pat Kelsey could put him into. Another aspect of this is we talk about Kelsey wanting to overall sort of get that narrative out of the way that his teams don't play good defensively by going and getting good defenders that play solid individual defense, great effort, solid hands, and can be a point of attack defender. Corin Johnson is the third commitment. Actually, you might be able to say, I mean, here's the thing. Every commitment that Louisville's gotten outside of maybe Ali Khalifa, I mean, Rain Smith is an underrated defender. James Scott is a good rim protector. Terrence Edwards, Javon Hadley are good defenders. Koren Johnson, good defender as well, averaging over a steal per game in both of his seasons up in Seattle, playing for Washington. And I would expect that that trend is going to continue. The ability to guard the opposing team's lead guard, potentially the two as well, depending on the opposing team's personnel. But I really, really think that this is a good addition. I don't see an issue with Johnson being able to increase those scoring numbers. I understand maybe the system that he's going to be playing in, the roster that he's playing on might not necessarily warrant a scoring jump, but I could definitely see him potentially being the top scorer on this team. He was at the very top of my Louisville men's basketball big board wish list outside of Jaden Quaintance because I think this kid is phenomenal on both ends of the court. Solid ball handling, solid three-point shot, good in transition, hard to stay in front of, great and attentive defender with active hands, good court vision to where he's able to find his open teammates and more. So I'm really, really excited to see what he brings to the table. Great commitment for Pat Kelsey, much needed because people were really getting a little concerned. So I don't think it's going to take much longer for the Cardinals to get more good news. And when that good news comes around, we'll discuss it right on here at the Locked On Louisville podcast. I do want to go over to the football side of things where it's been some tough news over the past week since the portal has reopened last Tuesday. A couple more players have entered as it relates to what it's going to mean for Louisville. A lot of it is centered around depth. We'll explain what losing each player means to this team next year and moving forward momentarily after we tell you about the opportunities over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are one day closer to the NFL draft. I'm getting excited, and one way that I've been sort of satisfying my NFL draft craving is by tuning into the Locked On NFL Mock Draft, which is now available. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on the Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now on the Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I wish this segment was full of good news because this is an episode full of excitement with Corin Johnson committing. But for better or for worse, we are going to discuss the relevant topics on the show. One of the relevant topics is in the football side of things where Louisville has lost some depth pieces. Tawfiq Thomas, Luke Burgess, Sam Secrest, all have entered the portal in the past 24 hours. And it's not necessarily something that you expect in terms of specific names, but it doesn't catch you off guard. At this point, after spring ball, you're seeing players that are buried down the depth chart and aren't necessarily happy with where they are in terms of playing time, and they opt to go elsewhere looking to play a little earlier. I can't fault them, and I hope that they find the right spot for them and they have successful careers, so we wish them the best. Louisville was already over the scholarship limit going into this period. They've lost some players like Penny Boone and Jalen Alderman who were projected to be starters. Now they're losing some players that were projected to be depth pieces, and this is something that you would have expected from a numbers standpoint. Tawfiq Thomas, I think, is the toughest loss of the three. Thomas, the 6'4" sophomore from Tampa, 6'4", 300 pounds, was a recruit from the Scott Satterfield days where a lot of people were intrigued by what he was going to be able to do in a 3-4 defense, and really never got a ton of time in his 2 seasons, had 12 total tackles, no sacks, no forced fumbles, no interceptions, no fumble recoveries, etc. But it felt like this year he was primed to be in a potential rotational role, especially with veteran defensive lineman Jermaine Lole entering the portal. He has thus since committed to Oklahoma as of Monday evening. So you felt like Thomas could crack into that 2 deep with Thor Griffith, Jared Dawson, Des Tell, Jordan Gerard, and then some of the local guys like Micah Carter, potentially Selah Brown, Wu Spencer, Sadiq Clemens. But Thomas has entered the portal, and I think for Louisville, with the remaining spots, a lot of the attention's going to go probably to the defensive line, where you've lost Lole and you've lost Thomas. You've dealt with some injury issues too, so it wouldn't surprise me to add maybe a multiple-year guy, maybe even a grad transfer, potentially multiple players to this room to help with depth in that 4-2-5-based defensive package. Ramon Purrier is back too, so they have depth at the moment, but 1 to 2 injuries in fall camp or leading up to the season could put Louisville in a very, very tough position. So I understand why you would want to maybe look to, add some players. Maybe the play of Maurice Davis and Xavier Porter, 2 true freshmen, could sway some decisions, but ultimately I wouldn't put anything past Louisville. The Cardinals also losing 2 offensive linemen recently, Luke Burgess and Sam Secrest. Luke Burgess was a part of that, Flyville 23 class from New Palestine, Indiana, 6'8", 300 pounds, plays the tackle spot. I personally thought that in a couple of years he was going to be the starting right tackle for the Cardinals. Now Louisville has obviously gone to the portal to address a lot of their offensive line needs. Burgess seems to be on the outside looking in terms of the 2 deep at the moment. So Burgess maybe opting to bet on himself and go to a place to where he might be able to play as a rotational piece or even a starter in 2024 makes a lot of sense for the Indiana native. So I'm interested to see where he ends up. But obviously, sucks to see him leave. Sucks to see L&M Eats from the state of Louisville go away. It was always nice to see that with Luke Burgess and Madden Sanker, and it's never nice to lose a player, but unfortunately you can kind of see why this would have happened. Another offensive lineman who has been with the program for the past 2 seasons, this will be his 3rd year, that is Sam Secrest, 6'6" lineman from Indianapolis, Indiana. He played at Roncalli High School. Hasn't seen, I don't believe he has seen any game action, was the 104th ranked interior offensive lineman coming out of high school, 27th offensive lineman in the state of Indiana. Didn't really have a ton of Power 5 interest. Main interest was from Ball State, Illinois State, and Central Michigan, sort of in that same area locally and regionally. So this one makes some sense. It didn't seem like there was going to be a pathway for him to get significant time this season and potentially not next season either. So going into his 3rd year after spring ball, you sort of have a better idea of where Louisville is at in terms of the depth chart. So it makes a lot of sense as to why he would enter the portal. Honestly, why all 3 of these players would enter the portal. I have to do a check on what Louisville's scholarship number is. I don't think the Cardinals are done losing players. There have been circulating rumors that Tyler Barron could enter the portal, which would be sort of devastating news for the Cardinals, but it sort of just is what it is in this day and age in terms of the transfer portal. So if that happens, then you obviously have a larger problem on your hands. At this point in time, the only key starting level guys that you've lost are Jalen Alderman and Penny Boone. I feel okay about the running back position with the rotation that they have there. The linebacking core, I still would like to see them add a player for depth, but TJ Quinn apparently has looked great in the offseason. Same with Stanquan Clark. And then Durante Davis has been a solid contributor. And I look forward to seeing maybe Trent Carter in the mix, but I would like to see another depth player in there, and maybe Antonio Watts transferring over to the interior of the linebacking core. But hopefully we can get some good news for the Cardinals in the portal, but at this point, not really much to address and write home about. It seems like, according to Jody Demling of Cardinal Authorities, cardinalauthority.com, 24/7 Louisville site, Jamon Tapp, highly ranked recruit, that's played the past couple years at Texas really hasn't been able to crack that too deep. He is in the portal and will be visiting Louisville soon. So that's another player we'll talk about coming up. But for the remainder of the show, I want to answer some questions that you all have asked, and we will get into those questions individually after we talk about our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Right now, I have a 4-leg parlay that's actually pretty close to hitting. Josh Hart has hit 2 threes. Tyrese Maxey has hit over 3. Joel Embiid has gotten over 10 rebounds. All I need is Jalen Brunson to get over 30 points. He has 12 in the second through the second quarter, so I need him to pick it up. But what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel remains America's #1 sportsbook. A lot of good questions that I want to discuss as it relates to both football and basketball. Starting out on the football side, this is a very sort of touchy subject with the transfer portal, but the question is, with players committing somewhere and then leaving after spring ball, do you think that should be allowed with NIL? I mean, I'm not one to say what the rules should be, but I think it is pretty wild that players can commit to a school, get months of NIL, and then decommit and go somewhere else, and they don't have to pay that money back. We've seen that a couple times. I mean, it is what it is. I'm interested to see how that is going to be addressed moving forward by the NCAA, but it sucks for places like Louisville who go out and they get solid commitments and then they stay through the winter, and then when the portal opens back up in the spring, it's like, hey, thanks for everything. We'll see you later. I mean, it's rough. It is rough, but unfortunately just sort of is what it is at this point. At this point, Louisville has 5 commitments for next year. Predict the next 3 commits. Okay. I'll give it a shot. I think Abubakar Traore is probably going to be the next commitment, in my opinion. The 6'5" forward from Long Beach State who was on campus at the end of last week. I think he will be the next commitment for Louisville. After that, I think it's probably the next 2 are in some order is going to be Ben Humrickhouse from Evansville and Chucky Hepburn from Wisconsin. And with that, you would have 9 scholarship players, 8 for next year's team. And you feel good about your team. You probably want to add some more players in the front court at the center spot. But the back court looks really good. You have some solid wings. Your power forward position looks really solid. But for me, that's probably going to be my prediction of the next 3. I haven't really heard about any other names that might make sense. Maybe, now this is another maybe, might round out the backcourt. Wesley Yates from Washington, top 50 recruit. Actually, I might want to throw Wesley Yates in there. Oh, goodness. I'm going to go Abubakar, Wesley Yates, and then we'll go, because he's visited before Chucky, I'm going to go with Ben Humrickhouse. So you get a player sort of set for the future in Wesley Yates, freshman last year, that had a stress fracture in his foot that he wasn't able to play on. So, but a lot of people were sort of encouraged by his play in the fall leading up to the season. So I'm going to go with those 3 and then Hepburn to be the next. And I think that would put you at, needing, I think you have 3 more scholarships, and I think ultimately you need to add to your front court at the center spot. But that's where I'm going to go with those. Jaden Quaintance is scheduling visits elsewhere. How do you feel about where Louisville stands? I made it a point of emphasis to say that Louisville's best chances would be if he committed soon after his visit, after, or before he can make any other visits. He's got a visit scheduled for Memphis this weekend. I don't feel good about this recruitment at all. Some might say that Louisville does feel good. That's fine. I'm not saying that they're wrong. Me personally, we know how this goes for Louisville fans. Oh, the guy has a great visit. They sit in a good spot. They sit in a good spot until they don't. And it happens all the time. We've seen all throughout the past decade and a half, 2 decades, players visiting. Oh, it's great visits. They visit somewhere else, and now that visit's great, and now they are the leaders. So if Louisville really wants to get a commitment from Jaden Quaintance, it's got to be before the Memphis visit, unless they just absolutely outbid everyone for JQ, which I'm not necessarily so sure they are going to, but we will see. I just don't feel good about that recruitment at this point in time. Does Louisville's ceiling change if both Penny Boone and Tyler Barron aren't on next year's team? Yeah, it does. It 100% does. Because as good as this running back committee can be, I'm not really worried about the running backs committee, but Penny Boone arguably is a top 10 running back in the country. He could be a top 5 running back in the ACC. He's that good. Tyler Barron is an experienced defensive lineman from the SEC with over 100 tackles to his name and over 20 sacks. You don't just find that production elsewhere. And I saw something where someone said, well, we can go get the Jamon Tapp guy to replace him. You're not wrong. Tapp has less than 10 total tackles to his collegiate resume, so I'm not really holding out the hope that that is a one-for-one direct replacement. You lose a potential top running back in the ACC. You lose a potential top pass rusher in the ACC with the top defensive lineman. You lose a big dynamic of your team. That can affect your ceiling. Now, does it mean that the season is over and that Louisville has no chance to make the college football playoff? No, of course not. But does it affect the ceiling of the team? Yes, because you lose 2 very, very, very good players. 2 of your arguably your 2 largest portal additions. That's where on the first question that we answered about if a player can commit to a team, take NIL, and then go elsewhere with no penalty, why it should or should not be allowed. And it sucks to think about that, but it sort of just is the way it is in the portal at the moment. So final question we will answer goes back to the basketball side of things. Ben Humrickhouse, from that video you posted, seems like he should have top schools going after him. Do you think that he can fit in with the Power 5? I do. Humrickhouse is a 6'9" unicorn that passes well, handles the ball well, shoots well, and is a decent rim protector despite being like a stretch 4. I mean, there's so many players in the portal, so not every school is going to go after every player, but Indiana, Purdue, Michigan State, all going after Humrickhouse, I believe. And I do think that impact can stretch to the Power 5. He does have a great skill set. It's hard to guard a 6'9" guy that can shoot that well. So for me, yes, Humrickhouse is ACC caliber and can succeed here. So that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Hopefully some more great news before we record tomorrow, but be sure to stay tuned. That will wrap up today's show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here coming up very shortly.